Maya Thompson, a brilliant attorney, was humiliated and excluded at a lavish charity luncheon simply because of her skin. Emily Hargrave and the rest of the billionaire family treated her with cold disdain, exposing their arrogance and narrow-mindedness for all to see. But Richard Hargrave stunned everyone by publicly announcing that Maya was not just a guest, she was his fiancée and soon-to-be wife. Just wait until you see how this shocking declaration turned the tables, restored her dignity, and left the entire room reeling with the power of true justice. It was a radiant afternoon in downtown Chicago, the kind of spring day that made the city's towering glass buildings sparkle in the sunlight. Maya Thompson adjusted her navy blue sheath dress as she approached the steps of the Hargrave estate, her heels clicking against the polished marble. She had been invited to the annual Hargrave Foundation charity luncheon, a gathering of Chicago's most influential and wealthy families. Maya's reputation as a sharp, accomplished attorney had earned her this invitation, yet as she drew closer, an uneasy tension prickled at the back of her neck. The estate loomed ahead, grand and imposing, with columns that reached toward the sky and ornate golden doors that gleamed in the sun. Guests were arriving in limousines, laughter and polite chatter spilling into the driveway. Maya's pulse quickened, not from nerves, but from the knowledge that her presence would be scrutinized in a room full of people accustomed to a certain kind of privilege. She walked with confidence, head held high, her mind recalling the countless hours of work that had brought her here. The cases she had won, the clients she had defended, the barriers she had broken through in a career dominated by privilege and tradition. As she approached the grand dining hall, she felt the shift immediately. Heads turned, not in admiration or curiosity, but with a chill of thinly veiled disdain. Some guests quickly turned their gaze away, as if they hadn't seen her at all. Others whispered behind their hands, their eyes darting between her and the Hargrave family, as though trying to measure her place in a world that had never been built for someone like her. Maya's stomach tightened, but she refused to falter. Richard Hargrave, the billionaire host, stood near the entrance, greeting his guests with the practiced ease of someone used to admiration and influence. Maya caught his eye briefly, and for a moment there was a polite nod, acknowledgment without judgment. But the real barrier wasn't Richard, it was the ones beside him. His family's expressions told a story louder than words ever could. Emily Hargrave, the eldest daughter, leaned slightly toward her mother, a faint smirk curling at the corner of her lips. As Maya approached the reserved table, Emily's voice, soft but sharp, reached her. "I'm not sitting next to her. Move somewhere else." There was no shame, no hesitation, only certainty. The words landed like stones, deliberate and cold, meant to unsettle, to assert dominance over someone who had dared enter their exclusive circle. A ripple of murmurs spread across the table. Other guests shifted in their seats, glancing around with unease, as if waiting for someone to correct the moment, to intervene. But no one did. Some looked at Maya with pity, others with a mixture of embarrassment and discomfort. The room, opulent and bright, seemed suddenly heavy, the crystal chandeliers casting reflections that now felt like sharp judgment rather than elegance. Maya felt the weight of the room settle on her shoulders, a mix of isolation and disbelief. Shock surged first, a sharp, immediate reaction to the blatant injustice. How could people be so callous, so unthinking? Then came anger, simmering beneath the surface, burning through the initial shock. She had earned her place here through intellect, perseverance, and integrity. She had never relied on wealth, privilege, or family connections to reach her position. And yet, a simple truth, her skin color, was enough for someone to dismiss her, to treat her as invisible, to define her worth as less than human. Maya's mind raced, recalling the countless moments throughout her life where she had been underestimated, excluded, or subtly dismissed. Each experience, each slight, had prepared her for this confrontation with arrogance and prejudice. She straightened her posture, squared her shoulders, and held her head high, refusing to shrink, to apologize for her presence. The anger didn't consume her. Instead, it sharpened her awareness, honed her resolve. She would not allow herself to be diminished, not today, not ever. The murmurs continued, but Maya took a deliberate step forward, surveying the table that had been so unwelcoming. The injustice of it burned like fire, but she carried with her the quiet strength that had defined her entire career. This was not just an insult, it was a challenge, and she would meet it head-on with the dignity, intelligence, and courage that had brought her here. In that moment, standing alone amid a room full of judgment and privilege, Maya felt the surge of clarity. She was not the outsider they feared. She was a force to be reckoned with, a presence that no amount of disdain could erase. And as the initial shock faded, her anger solidified, not as a weakness, but as the spark that would ignite the course of events that followed. Maya Thompson sat at the edge of the dining hall, her hands clasped neatly in her lap, as she forced a polite smile. She could hear the faint hum of conversation, punctuated by subtle whispers that seemed to dart like shadows across the room. Every glance in her direction felt weighted, a quiet reminder that, despite all her accomplishments, she was being judged solely for her appearance. The polite, composed exterior she projected felt fragile, a thin shield against the sting of exclusion. She remembered her father's steady voice, echoing words she had clung to throughout her life. Never let their prejudice define your worth. She had built her career on that principle, rising through law firms that had often doubted her, winning cases that others said she couldn't, earning respect through talent and determination alone. And yet, here, in this glittering room of chandeliers and gold-rimmed plates, surrounded by people who had never known struggle, she felt the weight of those words more acutely than ever. It was one thing to confront doubt in a courtroom. It was another entirely to be silently judged at a table designed for the elite. As the first course arrived, Maya's lunch felt cold in her hands. The laughter around her rang sharp and hollow, slicing through the polite veneer of civility. Guests spoke to one another in hushed tones, their eyes flicking toward her like reluctant witnesses to an unspoken tension. She tried to focus on the presentation of the meal, the subtle flavors and delicate plating, but each bite was tainted by the knowledge that she had been singled out, isolated, and dismissed. Every smile she returned was met with either polite avoidance or thinly veiled disdain. It wasn't only Emily Hargrave's scorn that weighed on her. It was the understanding that this moment was a culmination of a lifetime of invisible barriers, doors left slightly ajar, promotions passed over, casual remarks that carried unintended cruelty, and the constant need to prove herself in spaces where others had been born into advantage. The world she navigated so successfully outside these walls suddenly seemed smaller, harsher, and unfairly defined by social hierarchies she had worked so hard to rise above. The sting of exclusion cut deeper than any single insult. It was cumulative, layered, and unrelenting. Meanwhile, across the room, Richard Hargrave observed the scene in quiet frustration. He had always believed that wealth and education alone were sufficient for raising children to be respectable adults. But watching his daughter's smug expressions and the subtle cruelty in the behavior of his family, he felt an unexpected pang of shame. He realized with discomfort that he had failed to instill empathy, humility, or genuine respect for others. His children had inherited privilege, certainly, but not the grace or awareness necessary to wield it responsibly. In that gilded hall, surrounded by polished surfaces and perfection, Richard felt the first sharp ache of accountability. Maya's composure did not falter outwardly, but inwardly she felt the tension twist like a tight knot in her chest. Her training and experience had prepared her to navigate difficult conversations, but this was something different. This was subtle, systemic, and personal. Each whispered comment, each shift in body language reminded her that the world was not always fair, and sometimes it was cruel in ways that were quiet, persistent, and socially sanctioned. She clenched her fists lightly under the table, not out of anger this time, but from the raw ache of being reminded of her vulnerability in a space she had been invited into as an equal, yet treated as an outsider. Yet even in the midst of this pain, Maya felt the smallest flicker of resolve. She realized that these moments of discomfort, of quiet exclusion, were not the measure of her value. They were tests of endurance and self-awareness, moments that forced her to reconcile the world as it was with the person she knew herself to be. Richard, too, felt a shift. The pride he had long associated with wealth was giving way to something unfamiliar: guilt, awareness, and the desire to correct what had gone wrong. The emotional tension in the room was palpable, an invisible pressure that seemed to press on every polished surface and refined smile. Maya's pain was sharp, almost suffocating, but it was not defeat. She sat, poised and still, allowing the moment to unfold around her while feeling the full impact of the injustice. It was in this combination of quiet suffering and inner clarity that her strength began to solidify. She understood now that enduring this pain was not submission, it was preparation. Preparation for the confrontation, the revelation, and ultimately the vindication that would come. And with that understanding, the invisible walls of the luncheon, though still present, began to feel less formidable. By the time the dessert course was served, the tension in the Hargrave dining hall had become almost tangible, like the heavy, charged air before a storm. Maya Thompson sat upright, hands resting lightly on the polished table, trying to steady her breathing. Her mind raced as she watched the subtle glances exchanged across the room, glances that still carried judgment, still measured her presence with a cold, critical eye. But beneath the unease, a quiet determination was forming. She had endured the subtle cruelty of the afternoon, the whispering, the pointed looks, and now something shifted. Richard Hargrave, who had been quietly observing from his place at the head of the table, rose from his chair. The room immediately quieted, the soft clinking of silverware and the low murmur of conversation fading into an expectant silence. Maya's heart skipped a beat. There was an unfamiliar gravity in Richard's expression, a seriousness that signaled he was about to speak with intent. All eyes, previously scanning and judging, now turned toward him, waiting, anticipating. He cleared his throat, and the clarity in his voice cut through the atmosphere like sunlight piercing a clouded sky. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, and the words themselves carried weight, "there's something you should all know." His gaze shifted subtly toward Maya, who met his eyes with a mix of apprehension and cautious hope. The room seemed to hold its collective breath. Every family member, every guest, felt the sudden pull of expectation. Maya's heart pounded, and for a moment she allowed herself to imagine the worst: a patronizing remark, another slight, a continued reminder of her place as an outsider. But then Richard continued, his voice steady and unwavering. "Maya Thompson is not just a guest today. She is my fiancée. From this day forward, she is my wife." The words hung in the air like a powerful declaration, echoing off the gilded walls and crystal chandeliers. The gasps came first, a ripple that spread across the room. Emily Hargrave's face drained of color, her confident composure replaced by shock. Her mother clutched her napkin, her eyes wide and unblinking. Even the other family members, used to a lifetime of control and certainty, stuttered in disbelief, unable to comprehend that the carefully maintained hierarchy they had relied upon had just been disrupted. For a brief moment Maya could hardly breathe. She felt a surge of emotions, relief, astonishment, and a kind of cautious vindication. The injustice she had endured, the exclusion, the subtle scorn, all of it had led to this moment. The man who had observed the cruelty, who had quietly noted every whisper and sideways glance, had taken the only action that could truly shift the balance. In that room, filled with wealth, influence, and judgment, he had wielded a power far more effective than money or status, the power of truth and commitment. Maya's pulse surged with a mix of excitement and relief. She felt herself standing taller, though she had not moved. Every sense was heightened, the murmur of disbelief around her, the sharp intake of breath, the faint tremble in the hands of those who had judged her. She realized that the fight was not yet fully over, but a pivotal battle had been won. The scales of justice, previously invisible and unbalanced, had begun to tip in her favor. Richard's announcement changed the dynamics of the room in an instant. The carefully maintained superiority of the Hargrave family, built over decades, was now under scrutiny, and they could do nothing to reclaim the position they had assumed as their birthright. Maya felt an unfamiliar warmth, a blend of gratitude and empowerment. For the first time in hours, the weight pressing on her shoulders eased, replaced by the hope that her dignity had not only been recognized but affirmed publicly. As the guests exchanged uncertain glances, Maya allowed herself a small, confident smile. She had endured the whispers, the stares, the subtle cruelty, and now the first cracks of justice were appearing. The afternoon's tension shifted, evolving from helplessness to possibility. In that charged silence, Maya felt it. The fight against prejudice and arrogance had begun to turn, and for the first time that day, hope took hold, steady and unwavering, promising that the story was far from over, and that the next chapter could be hers to define. The air in the Hargrave dining hall felt electric, charged with disbelief and anticipation. Maya Thompson rose slowly, her posture regal, her movements measured as she accepted Richard Hargrave's hand. The subtle tension that had gripped the room all afternoon seemed to shift, like a tide turning, reshaping the space around her. For the first time in hours, she felt unshackled, not merely a guest enduring judgment, but a woman asserting her place with dignity and grace. The Hargraves' laughter, which had been light and confident earlier, froze mid-gesture. The arrogance that had been their armor now felt brittle under the weight of Richard's declaration and Maya's calm composure. Emily Hargrave's eyes flickered between shock and disbelief, her practiced expressions of superiority rendered meaningless. The rest of the family shifted uncomfortably in their seats, the golden tablecloths and polished silver reflecting a tension that had replaced the illusion of control they had long taken for granted. Maya's mind raced, but her emotions were steady. The sting of exclusion, the whispers and pointed glances, were no longer wounds. They had become fuel. Each moment of humiliation had sharpened her awareness and strengthened her resolve. Now, standing beside the man who had recognized her worth, she realized that the pain of the afternoon had led to this powerful affirmation of her place in the world. This was more than personal triumph. It was a quiet revolution within the gilded walls of the Hargrave estate. Richard's calm presence beside her underscored the significance of the moment. He had observed the injustice silently for hours, watching the subtle cruelty and entitlement of his family. And now, with one decisive act, he had chosen truth, love, and justice over appearances or tradition. The combination of his courage and her poise created an undeniable force, an unspoken lesson that respect cannot be inherited, bought, or demanded through status. It must be earned through character. Guests murmured among themselves, some exchanging glances that blended admiration with disbelief. The story of the luncheon would soon ripple outward, spreading through Chicago's social circles and beyond. It was a story that challenged long-held assumptions about power, privilege, and prejudice. Maya and Richard had transformed what had begun as a scene of exclusion into a demonstration of integrity and courage. Their actions sent a clear message. Injustice may come in quiet, seemingly subtle forms, but it can be met with dignity and resolve, turning humiliation into triumph. Maya's gaze swept the room one final time before she and Richard moved together. She no longer felt the sharp edge of shame or the weight of the subtle judgments that had hovered over her all afternoon. Instead, she felt something deeper, the quiet, exhilarating satisfaction of having stood her ground and emerged stronger. The power of self-respect and moral courage had reshaped the narrative of the day. In that moment, she became not only a participant in history, but a symbol for anyone who had ever been underestimated, dismissed, or excluded. Over the following days, the story of the luncheon spread like wildfire through Chicago's elite society. Articles, social media posts, and whispered conversations recounted the bold act of acknowledgement and love, highlighting the reversal of injustice and the affirmation of dignity. Maya's unwavering composure and Richard's courage became a beacon, demonstrating that the influence of wealth and status pales in comparison to the impact of integrity and empathy. Their example inspired many to confront prejudice and embrace respect in ways that were thoughtful, deliberate, and powerful. By the end of that day, Maya felt a sense of completion she had never known in similar social arenas. She had arrived as a guest who could have been diminished, dismissed, or ignored. But she left as a figure of quiet authority, embodying strength, poise, and triumph. The moment became a turning point, not only for her own life, but for the message it sent to the broader world. That dignity cannot be stolen, prejudice can be confronted, and true justice can appear in the most unexpected, breathtaking ways. Maya's story would resonate far beyond the walls of the Hargrave estate, a testament to courage, self-worth, and the transformative power of standing tall against injustice.